All right, thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar on the impacts of COVID-19 on small businesses with leases. We are very excited today to have the Business Law Corp's attorneys, as well as Kelly Vea joining us today for today's webinar. After today's presentation, we'll be having a short Q&A, so be sure to stay on and join us for that. And for everyone that is attending, we would like to let you know that this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to view it at your leisure after today's webinar. And then also if you could please set your video to gallery view. We have several speakers that will be presenting today. And now before I proceed, we'd like to have Colleen McAlooney, MCBL's Program Director, to say a few words. Colleen?
Thank you, Brittany. Aloha and welcome to today's MCBL webinar on small business leases impacted by COVID-19. As the only women's business center in Hawaii, MCBL is proud to support and assist entrepreneurs in starting and growing small businesses. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us for free small business counseling and support as you navigate these unprecedented times. I'd like to say a quick thank you to Kat, Shanice, and Kelly for facilitating our webinar this morning. And back to Brittany.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Now I would like to introduce you to our team. I'm Brittany Montiliano, Program Manager for the Center. I'll be helping with moderating the room. And if you have any questions, we have Maylen Zambrano, who is our Program Manager, Program Coordinator for the Center. If you experience any technical difficulties, say if you get logged off or you have trouble logging back in, please email Maylen at mzambrano@ywcaoahu.org. Maylen will also be entering her information into the chat area for your reference. Now I would like to introduce you to our moderator for today, Catherine Tashner. Catherine is the co-founder for the Business Law Corps and is also the partner for McCorson, Miller, Mackay, McKinnon, and LLP. Kat?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for logging in today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Business Law Corps, we provide free legal services to Hawaii's small businesses and entrepreneur community. So if you have any questions after this about some of the legal aspects, we have free 30-minute appointments available through the Patsy Mink Center and at the Entrepreneur Sandbox. And we also do direct legal services. I am the co-founder of the Business Law Corps, and we're very grateful today that we have our two speakers. Our first speaker is Shanice Iwamasa. Shanice is the principal attorney and founder of Ziva Law. She has over 16 years of experience in practicing law in various practice areas, but eventually went on to found her own law firm, Ziva Law, with the vision of developing a niche practice of representing commercial tenants and commercial leases. So today we're very, very lucky to welcome her. Our second speaker is Kelly Vea, who is a real estate advisor with Cushman & Wakefield Cheney Brooks. Kelly is born and raised on Oahu, and her deep local roots have given her intimate knowledge of the areas she now represents. Her primary focus is representing both tenants and landlords throughout Oahu's industrial markets. So thank you to Shanice and Kelly for joining us. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Brittany, can we get the next slide? So we actually built in some of our speaker stuff into our slides. So in addition to what Kat kind of went over, a fun fact about me that I'll share is during college, I taught women's kickboxing and also was in a professional hip hop dance company. Kelly, next slide.
My fun fact is that I love to go hiking. So the most challenging hike I've done so far is the Moana Lua Saddle one, which took me 10 hours, and I was so tired after.
Great. So Kat, you want to take this?
And the fun stuff, legal disclaimers. So I have to share with you that the information provided during this seminar is all legal information, not legal advice. All of the statements and materials represent the opinions of the individual authors writing in their individual capacities only, not those of their respective employers or the seminar sponsors. Nothing contained in these materials is to be considered as the rendering of legal advice for specific cases. And the seminar and the materials referenced in the handouts are intended for educational and informational purposes only. In addition, while a lot of the information in today's seminar will be useful for commercial tenants regardless of where they're located, some of the issues are going to be state specific. So our sponsors, our presenters are all Hawaii based, so all of the information presented in this seminar is also Hawaii based.
Excellent. Next slide. So thank you all for being here today. We're super excited. We have a jam-packed schedule lined up for you today. So real quick before we get started, just wanted to go through the agenda for what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about rent relief, business interruption insurance, other tenant lease obligations, the status of commercial evictions, the impact of COVID-19 on the commercial real estate market. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with some practical tips for you on navigating COVID-19 related commercial lease issues. And hopefully, if we can get through all of this in time, then we have a few minutes at the end to do Q&A. So again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, drop them in the chat box and Kat will be monitoring that for us. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to get us started with rent relief.
Okay, so let's jump in with our first topic, which is rent relief. So what happens if you can't pay a rent? Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give you guys some general trends or statistics for the different asset classes. Now this is pre-COVID rates, and we're still kind of waiting to see the effects of COVID on our asking rates, which we should see in the next few months. So first picture I have is retail. You guys are familiar with this. It's Ala Moana Shopping Center. Retail generally depends on your location. So places that typically generate a significant amount of foot traffic, like the Ala Moana Shopping Center or Waikiki, can be in that $15 to $30 a square foot range for rents. Then you have your neighborhood shopping centers, which are more around like $5 to $7 a square foot. Second photo I have is office. So rates for office space also really depend on your location. Downtown Honolulu in that central business district is probably closer to $3.20 a square foot, while Kapiolani is around $3.50. So generally office is somewhere in that $3 to $4 a square foot gross range. And the third photo we have is industrial, which averages about $1.70 to $1.90 a square foot gross, depending on the location as well and the quality of the product. So a lot of industrial product in town is low cube. It doesn't have loading docks. It doesn't have a lot of parking, but it's in Honolulu. And then the product that you have out in Kapolei, typically more high cube, there's loading docks, loading zones, and a lot more parking. So generally averages about $1.70 to $1.90 across the island. Next slide, please. So let's get into rent abatement versus deferral. These are two options that landlords are considering using to help their tenants during COVID-19. So basically, rent abatement is a period of free rent. So your landlord would essentially waive your base rent for the time being. Typically, most landlords are still having their tenants pay the CAM or the operating expenses, but the base rent is waived. And then a second option is rent deferral. So this is when the landlord allows their tenant to defer their rent for a period of time. So for example, a tenant would defer their rent for like 4 months, and then the landlord and tenant would agree on a payment plan. So for the next year or two, they would pay back that rent that they've deferred, hopefully when times are better and their businesses are back on track. So those are two main options that we've been seeing as the rent abatement and rent deferral. Next slide, please. So are there any other options out there? I mean, we've seen rent abatement, rent deferral a lot, but is there anything else that tenants and landlords can do, any other creative solutions? So one thing we've been seeing is security deposit. So some landlords are using the tenant security deposit as rent and then placing the tenant on a payment plan over the next few months, year or so, whatever is kind of reasonable for the tenant and landlord to pay back that security deposit. Second thing I've been seeing is a blend and extend. So this is when you would extend the term of your lease and then negotiate a new rate. So maybe something much lower for this next year because we still aren't too sure what's going to happen. So a lower rate for that first year, and hopefully you're back on track. And the next year's where the rate would be a little bit higher. So just help you with that first year and get back in, and then you would extend your lease term. So something like that. Those are two other options that you guys can talk to your landlords about and then see if this is something that they would consider. Next slide, please. Now, it's so important to be prepared. Most of the landlords that I know and that I work with, they're willing to help their tenants, but sometimes they don't know that you need help. So it's really important as a tenant to reach out to your landlord and have an open line of communication and say, hey, I really do need help. I'm struggling a lot right now. So it's important to be prepared with financial documents. Most landlords want to help, but they want to make sure that you actually need help and that you're not just trying to take advantage of a situation. So they might ask for documents like a profit and loss statement comparing this year to last year. They might ask to see that you've applied for stimulus money. They also might want to see sales reports. So just having documents like that prepared and on hand and ready to send to your landlord just makes the process easier. And it's important to have an open line of communication with your landlord. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. So next we're going to talk about business interruption insurance and whether COVID-19 losses are covered. So most business owners rely on insurance to manage risk. And as a result of the pandemic, really there's many different lines of insurance coverage that are likely to see a boost in claims. We could easily spend an entire hour just on insurance alone. So for today's discussion, I'm really just going to briefly talk about one type of insurance, and that's business interruption insurance. And the reasons are, one, I've been seeing landlords actually asking the tenants specifically if they filed a business interruption insurance claim. And then second, it's just been in the media a lot. Next slide. So, on the local, national, and international level, business interruption insurance issues have been highly publicized in the media. Next slide. So what is business interruption insurance? Business interruption insurance is typically included as part of a commercial property policy, and it can help replace a business's losses if you have to shut down due to a direct physical loss or damage to the covered property. Next slide. Now, although there are separate standalone business interruption policies and extended coverage policies, many small business owners don't really purchase those types of policies, mainly because it involves an additional premium. So today's discussion really just assumes the business interruption coverage in your standard business policy. Now, a common example of how business interruption coverage is ordinarily triggered is, say, the building in the space that you're leasing has a fire. And so there's significant damage and you have to shut down your business while they rebuild. So maybe 9 months, 12 months. So in that situation, you might be able to make claims under your business interruption insurance policy for the consequences of not being able to operate due to that loss. So some examples of the types of expenses you could recover might be, lost revenue, rent or mortgage payments, loan payments, payroll costs, relocation costs, things of that nature. Now, one of the key issues for COVID-19 related business interruption claims is whether it constitutes direct physical loss or damage to the insured property, which is a threshold requirement in most policies. Next slide. Now, not surprisingly, the insurance industry's position, generally speaking, has been no coverage. So they are denying many business interruption insurance claims on the ground that there is no physical loss or damage to the insured property. And then also secondarily, the insurance companies might also argue that there's no coverage because pandemics and viruses are specifically excluded from coverage in the policies. And that kind of came, they started inserting that exclusionary language after things like Ebola, SARS, swine flu, all of those events. Next slide. Now, whenever there is disagreement on interpretation and uncertainty, that's basically breeding ground for lawsuits. So complaints have already been filed across the United States. So at least 50 states, at least 50 cases have been filed either as national or statewide class action lawsuits so far. And although, some businesses will choose to battle it out in court, I think the challenge for independent small business owners is that even if you have a possible claim, what is it going to cost you in terms of time, money, and energy to fight your insurance company on these issues? So there will no doubt be a lot more litigation in this space, and it will be interesting to see how things play out. Next slide. So a few quick tips for dealing with business interruption insurance claims. First, look at your insurance policy. So coverage depends on the language that's in your insurance policy, and the coverage analysis is often very fact specific. So the first step is always to look at the policy and seek help from a professional like an insurance attorney or someone who might be able to help you interpret the language, because sometimes those insurance policies are very confusing to read. Second, consider filing a claim even if you think you don't have coverage. So because of this gray area and the uncertainty, many insurance attorneys and CPs are encouraging people to just file, even if you think you don't have coverage. And the reason for this is just to preserve potential claims. And also, it doesn't really hurt to just file anyway. And then a secondary benefit is that, like I said earlier, when landlords are asking if you filed a business interruption insurance claim, this is a way that you can show them that, hey, I'm doing everything I can and I'm trying to minimize losses. So more like even if you don't think you have coverage, it's a way to show that you're making a good faith effort. And then finally, keep good records of your expenses. Next slide. Okay, on to the next section is going to be on other tenant lease obligations. So, rent relief and all of the things that Kelly talked about earlier are usually top of mind for most small business owners right now. But there are other lease issues to be aware of so that you don't inadvertently breach your lease. So in this section, we're going to talk about some common non-rent related issues arising out of COVID-19. Next slide. So the first we're going to cover is force majeure clauses. That has been the hot topic of the season in this space. I'm sure a lot of you have read articles about it or seen it on the news. So it is very common for commercial leases and other business contracts to have a force majeure clause. And a force majeure clause basically excuses or delays performance of a contractual obligation due to events that are beyond either party's control. So these are things like acts of God, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, riots, labor strikes, and often it also includes things like government orders or government issues from government authorities. Now, when COVID first hit, people were looking to the force majeure clause to excuse payment of rent. However, many commercial leases today specifically state that force majeure does not excuse or delay payment of rent. So that's an important thing to note. Now, I have an interesting recent development to share that I literally just read this morning. So I didn't have a chance to read the actual case. But just last week, one of the first court cases to consider force majeure and COVID is a US bankruptcy court case in Illinois called In Re Hits Restaurant Group. So the judge in that case held that a restaurant tenant was entitled to a rent reduction under its force majeure clause due to the Illinois governor's executive order, which had directed all restaurants to suspend service for on-premises consumption, which is similar to what we have here. But it is worth noting that the force majeure clause in that case did not contain the language that carves out rent payments from the type of obligations that are excused. So again, it's really highly dependent on the specific language of your force majeure clause at issue, and that varies from lease to lease. So now, even if you cannot use the force majeure clause to excuse payment of rent, it still can be an important clause if you're dealing with a non-monetary obligation. So say if you were obligated to build some tenant improvements or make a repair, something of that nature. So in those cases, and assuming of course that you can establish a causal connection with COVID-19, you could point to the force majeure clause as a basis for an extension of time, say to complete whatever it is you were obligated to do. Next slide. Construction delays. So that's a good segue into construction delays because that is, we're using force majeure clauses in the construction delay context. So whenever a lease contemplates any kind of construction or improvements to the premises, there are often very strict deadlines in place for completion of the work. Now, this could apply to the landlord's work, that they have to do prior to turning over the premises to you, or it could be tenants' obligations to build out the space before opening for business. Now, COVID-19 has caused widespread disruption, and a common issue has been the inability to complete construction on either the landlord or the tenant side due to COVID. So things like shortages in labor, material. And so in those cases, you may be able to use force majeure clause to support a request for an extension of time. Generally, in these types of situations, it's really just best to communicate with your landlord if you anticipate not being able to satisfy an obligation under your lease, and just work with them to agree on a revised timeline. And many landlords seem open to doing that. Next slide. Next is changes in use. So leases usually contain a clause that specifies what is the permitted use of the premises. So a common example, maybe I would say, the premises can only be used for a sit-down Mexican restaurant and no other uses without landlord's prior written consent. That's like a common wording. Now, when COVID hit, many businesses had to pivot and be innovative in what kind of products and services that they're offering. So, for example, an alcohol distillery maybe is, pivoting and manufacturing hand sanitizer. So one issue that comes up is just making sure that if you're doing something in the premises that is not covered by your permitted use clause, then you may need to obtain your landlord's consent. So in some cases, it may be super easy and the landlord may be totally fine with it. But in other cases, the landlord may have an issue. And one reason might be that sometimes landlords will give exclusive rights to other tenants in a project. To say be the only pizza place in that project or something like that. So if you say do a pivot and then you're serving something that should not be served by other tenants in the project, you could open up the landlord to some potential risk and liability for allowing you to do that. So in those cases, the landlord might have an issue with it. So I think the big takeaway is just make sure that you check your lease and obtain the landlord's consent if it's required. Next slide. Operating covenants. So many leases, particularly retail leases, have minimum operating hours. So it might say that you have to stay open from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday, or Monday through Sunday, except for mall holidays or something like that. Now, due to COVID-19 and related government orders, many businesses were shut down temporarily. And then now as we're reopening the economy, some businesses are operating on a reduced schedule. So make sure that you keep the lines of communication open with your landlord to ensure that you're complying with your lease obligations in this respect. Now, if you were totally shut down because you were non-essential for a period of time and it was required by law, or if the whole shopping center was closed, you probably don't have an issue. But if you are unilaterally deciding, hey, we want to cut back our hours, you might want to take it up with your landlord just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So if you anticipate needing any kind of modified operating hours for a period of time to help you, rebuild, you might want to just negotiate that and have that conversation with your landlord. Next slide. Alterations and renovations. So most leases do include restrictions on altering your premises without the prior written consent of your landlord. So COVID has brought with it, as you know, a whole bunch of social distancing requirements that businesses have to comply with. And many of the social distancing measures, like the one shown in this picture, may not necessarily rise to the level of needing landlord's consent. However, if you are making any more significant renovations or alterations to your premises, like moving walls or relocating electrical, affixing things to the floors or the walls, you may want to check your lease to confirm if what you're doing will require landlord's consent. Next slide. Subleasing. So almost all commercial leases will say that tenant cannot assign or sublease without landlord's prior written consent. So when COVID happened, some tenants thought that perhaps, they can alleviate the financial burden of the rent expense by subleasing a portion of their premises out, but not realizing that you need to get permission to do so. So if you are considering subleasing, just review the assignment and subleasing provisions of your lease very carefully to understand what your obligations are and what the process is, because it's usually laid out clearly in that section. Next slide. And then finally, confidentiality clauses. So some, but not all, leases have a confidentiality clause. And many tenants don't even realize it's in there because it's often buried way at the back of the lease. But the confidentiality clause generally will prohibit a tenant from disclosing information about the lease to third parties, usually with certain exceptions. So, when COVID happened and everyone's kind of just in this, the sky is falling mode a little bit, that there's a tendency to want to talk to other tenants and say, what are you doing? And what did your landlord give you? So just be very careful about potentially violating any confidentiality clauses. So if you are in doubt, kind of just go back and check your lease to see if you're bound by one. And even if you don't have one in your lease, I'm finding that many landlords are conditioning their workout agreements on a confidentiality agreement because they don't want the tenants to say, hey, I got this, and they didn't get that. Next slide. Okay, the next section is on commercial evictions. So another common question in the back of small business owners' minds is, in a worst case scenario, if I breach my lease, can my landlord evict me? So there's been also a lot of media coverage on this, and sometimes it can be a little confusing, and also the landscape is changing constantly. So in this next section, we're going to cover where we are on this right now. Next slide. So under the CARES Act did provide a limited moratorium on evictions for residential tenants occupying certain rental properties with federal assistance or financed by federally backed mortgages, like the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, HUD loans, things like that. But this only applied to residential, these limited residential evictions, not commercial. Next slide. Now, in Hawaii, there was a broader eviction moratorium under Governor Ige's emergency proclamation that only applied to residential evictions, so not commercial evictions. However, so the Hawaii courts have been operating on a restricted basis for a lot of this emergent stay-at-home period. So for example, the Honolulu District Court was closed other than for emergency proceedings like TROs and things like that. So therefore, even though there wasn't a law in place that prevented people from initiating commercial eviction proceedings, as a practical matter, landlords weren't able to file a summary possession complaint, for example, in district court during that period. And just to be clear, tenants are still on the hook for rent, et cetera, but the landlord just wasn't able to file proceedings during that period of time. Now, as of June 22nd, the Honolulu District Court is hearing landlord-tenant cases that are not covered by Governor Ige's proclamation. So as of today, yes, in the commercial space, a landlord would be able to commence eviction proceedings against you. But because the courts have been closed for a few months, there's probably going to be a little bit of a backlog as they catch up. And again, this part of the presentation is very specific to your jurisdiction. So if you're on an outer island in Hawaii, or if you're even in another state, you should just check with either on your judiciary website, or you can probably call the courthouses to find out current information on court closures. Next slide. Now, although Hawaii currently does not have a commercial eviction moratorium in place, other states or other counties in states like California, Washington, Oregon, New York, and others do. And it's also interesting to note that some of the government orders in other states actually also addressed rent relief for commercial tenants. So particularly those who are experiencing financial hardship resulting from the pandemic. And a lot of them were targeted to helping small businesses and nonprofits. Next slide. Kelly?
Okay, so I'm sure you are all wondering, how has COVID-19 impacted the commercial real estate market? Now, I specialize in industrial, so I reached out to the retail and office market leads at Cheney Brooks for some insight. So shout out to Matt Schul and Alan Yamaguchi for sharing and helping me with this. So let's start with retail. Next slide, please. For retail, landlords have typically been evaluating their tenants on a case-by-case basis. So it has been common for tenants to defer for 2 to 4 months and then add term. So this is kind of like the blend and extend idea that I mentioned earlier. Other landlords have just given pure free rent, especially for those tenants that are in Waikiki or heavily trafficked tourist areas that aren't really getting any customers right now. And then some have given no rent relief. So it's really kind of all across. Ultimately, it has depended on the tenant's communication with their landlord. So like I said before, communication is really important. It's important to be honest and open with your landlord. I know in Hawaii, some tenants might feel a little shame, like they should have the responsibility to take care of their business and they don't want to ask for help. But during this time, it's really important to be honest and open and ask for help. Especially with the Waikiki market, it's been very hard for tenants. We are down to like 500 visitors a day instead of 35,000, and some of these tenants are surviving, like the restaurants who were able to do takeout during this time and they can now do sit-down service. But a lot of other Waikiki tenants, they just don't have any customers. Landlords might also not want to take back a space if a tenant decides to leave because it could be very hard to lease. So this is a problem that some of the landlords are having. And then vacancy should probably start to pop up over the next few months, but it seems like retailers are waiting for that holiday season, and they're hoping that the tourism in Hawaii comes back a little bit for the holiday season, and so they can kind of make more of their money then. As for new deals, there hasn't been a ton of the typical new retail deals getting done, but there are creative deals getting done. So for example, deals with significantly reduced first year rates and then much higher escalations on the back end for the remainder of the term. Something interesting that Matt told me was that some of the rent increases are tied to tourism numbers or hotel occupancy. So kind of depending when the influx of tourism and when people start coming back to visit, that's when it's tied to your rent increase. So that kind of makes sense for the more heavily tourism trafficked areas. And then in the Waikiki market, it seems like only deals are getting done when the tenant and landlord are able to get creative, but this is less so for the neighborhood retail centers, which are geared more towards the local people who live in the area. So next slide, we have office space. So for office, it seems like the attorneys, the insurance guys, and accountants are all still doing really well. Most of the tenants for office were able to get PPP, and it seems like some of the landlords are doing deferment, but they are not giving a rent deduction. So some have done something like half rent for now, and then they put the tenant on a payment plan with no interest. So that's one example. Largest hit was the Waikiki office. So all of those Japanese related businesses are hurting. The travel companies or those Japanese wedding companies, those were hit the hardest. And as for new deals, there have been more free rent given, but not too much. And then old tenants have been renewing, but they've been asking for discounts or more free rent. So typically landlords are keeping the rent the same, but not having any increases. And then even before COVID, for the office space, the office market was seeing a shift into smaller spaces because they don't need as much file space since everyone is moving to a cloud system. Work from home should probably cause this office requirement to be smaller. A lot of people are used to working from home now. I have kind of moved into my work from home office and I like working from home. I get to hang out with my cat all day long, so that's fun. And then especially those co-working spaces, you can only use like half of the size now because of social distancing. So I think we're gonna see that requirement start to be a lot smaller. And then the next slide, we can get into the industrial market. So overall, the industrial market seems to have remained the strongest. A lot of these guys are contractors and they're still doing renovation projects. A lot of people are at home and they want to do home renovations. They're at home too much now and they're like, oh, I need to fix this, I need to fix that. So those guys are still busy. Businesses centered around the tourism, restaurant, and entertainment industry have been struggling the most. We're still seeing new deals getting done at pre-COVID rates, so at that $1.70 to $1.90 rate I mentioned earlier, it's still getting achieved, and I haven't seen any extra concessions. So typically For industrial landlords, we'll give 1 to 2 months of free base rent, depending on the length of the term. So maybe 1 month of free base rent for a 3-year term and 2 months of free for a 5-year term. And I haven't seen that to change too much. So during COVID, I was still actively showing space. It did slow down, but I had at least a few showings every week, even during the height of COVID. So we were still seeing people want to look at space and then seeing deals get done. I think we did like 8 lease deals during the whole COVID time. So it was kind of surprising. We're still staying active. But overall, I do think it's still a little too early to tell how COVID has impacted everything. I think that once the stimulus money runs out, we will see the effects of COVID more clearly. Then on to the next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about some practical tips for navigating COVID-19 related commercial lease issues. Next slide. So practical tip number 1 is review your lease. It sounds basic, but it's super important. It always has to be the starting point. You need to know what your rights and obligations are, what your landlord's rights and obligations are, and what other possible lease terms that could give you more or less leverage in a negotiation. It is not uncommon for tenants to incorrectly remember what the lease terms were. So I've seen situations where tenants mistakenly thought that their lease had already expired and they were just on a month-to-month, and then they find out that they're actually on the hook for another 5 years. So that's a totally different situation to be bargaining from. So remember, there is no such thing as a standard lease. So the language in every lease is different, and you need to look at the specific language in your lease first. Next slide.
Tip number 2 is to get help and start the conversation with your landlord early. So like I mentioned before, a lot of tenants, especially in Hawaii, may not want to say anything. They may not want to reach out and ask for help, but it's really important to start that conversation early. Then the landlord will know, like, oh, hey, this tenant needs help. They reached out to me. And then just having everything ready and then keeping an open line of communication with them to let them know that you do need help and that your business has been greatly affected by this.
Yeah, and also to add on there is that negotiation takes time. So when I get a call from someone and it's May 31st and you're like, I can't pay my June, you know, we need time to help you. So the more time you can give us to help you, the better. Okay, next slide. Okay, practical tip number 3 is plan and think strategically before taking action. So there's really two points on this. So first, some tenants I've seen making a request to their landlord or accepting a proposal from their landlord without doing any homework, and then later finding out that the terms were not reasonable or were not practical or were not market, and then they regret the decision. Okay, so before taking any action, just take a step back and think about where your business is today, where it might be 6 months from now, and even your long-term plans, and how COVID has impacted your business is really going to be unique to each business. So it depends on your industry, your geographic location, the history and financial strength of your business as well. So just pausing, I know everything gets crazy with COVID, but just pausing and trying to work through those numbers and that analysis on your business before making any long-term decisions. Now, second, some tenants have taken the approach of trying to show their landlords how bad they are suffering financially as a result of COVID. And I get it, you know, you're trying to establish the financial hardship. But just keep in mind that from the landlord's perspective, they want a tenant that's going to survive and recover from COVID and be able to pay their rent for many more years to come. So if you paint too much of a doomsday picture, you might inadvertently give your landlord cause for concern or make them hesitate in giving you maybe possibly more concessions. So really try to just strike that balance of demonstrating genuine financial hardship that's going to justify your rent relief request, but also keeping an optimistic outlook, right? So you want to show your landlord that, hey, we were a solid business pre-COVID, and here's our plan to get through this. We're going to be okay. And then taking this approach really might make your landlord more willing to work with you and give you some concessions so that you guys both can get through it together. Next slide.
Okay, tip number 4 is to take a reasonable approach in negotiations. So most landlords want to see their tenants succeed, but it also needs to be a deal that works out for both parties. So you can't just expect your landlord to give you 6 months of rent abatement and not have to pay anything. So it has to be a mutual kind of thing between you and the landlord. It has to work for both the landlord and you, and to foster a long-term relationship.
Next slide. Practical tip number 5 is make sure your repayment plan is realistic. So a common rent relief structure that we've been seeing is the rent deferment, and that comes with a repayment plan. So one common structure we've seen is, say landlords maybe gave a rent deferment for April, May, June, and then the tenant has to start repaying their deferred rent July 1st on top of their existing rent for the next 2 to 3 months. Now, for businesses who maybe just opened up in mid-June, that's going to be very difficult and in some cases impossible to do. So really look at your revenue projections, your expenses, other sources of funding like your PPP loans and your EIDL loans, and make sure that the proposed repayment plan is realistic for your business. And if not, try to negotiate and spread it out over maybe a longer period of time, or try to push back the date when you have to start making the installment payments. And just give yourself enough time for your business to get up and running again. Next slide.
Tip number 6 is to be professional and respectful to preserve the landlord-tenant relationship. So I know this is a really hard time for a lot of tenants out there, but it's important to still be respectful and to foster a good relationship with your landlord. You don't want to have a bad relationship with your landlord, especially during this time, because you want to work something out with them, and so the nicer that the relationship is, the more willing that the landlord probably will be to give you deferral or abatement or work out maybe a longer term repayment plan with you. So just be respectful. Know that the landlord might be in a bad position as well too, so they're trying to work out something with you so that both parties can come out of this in a positive way. Next slide, please.
Okay, practical tip number 7 is carefully review the terms of any written agreement before signing. So some tenants are so happy to get some rent relief from their landlord that they're just sign whatever agreement the landlord gives them without reading it carefully. Now, one thing to be wary of is that I have seen agreements where the landlord slipped in some other modifications to the original lease terms that were not discussed. So things like increasing the area of the premises, which then could increase your rent or your CAM, and increasing the percentage of annual rent increases. So you just got to be very careful, review any agreement that you get from your landlord very carefully before signing it, and make sure you understand the terms that you're agreeing to so that you don't inadvertently waive any rights. Next slide.
Okay, and our last practical tip is to prepare your financials ahead of time. So especially now with everything going on, just have those financials ready, have your comparisons from this year to last year, have your financial documents for when you applied for stimulus money ready, so that when you do go to your landlord, you have that on file already prepared and it's easy for you to just share it. You don't have to dig through it or call your accountant or call people to dig up these documents. You just have it already and it's easy to present.
Cool, thanks ladies. So we have a couple questions in the group chat. So, Kelly, the last practical tip that you gave was have your documents ready. If I'm a tenant and I really need to go to my landlord and ask for rent deferment or any other kind of payment plan, what documents should I bring with me? What would be helpful?
I think I mentioned before that having the profit and loss statement, so it compares this year to last year, so your landlord can see, okay, hey, you were doing really good last year, you were on track to do even better this year, but because of COVID, your numbers are significantly less. applications for your stimulus money. I know quite a few landlords were asking for this just to make sure that their tenants had tried to apply for that. And then even sales reports could be helpful, showing that you were on track at the beginning of the year to exceed last year or something like that, but it just dropped off right at like February, March.
Cool. Another question that kind of has to do with documents and what do I need? If I want to meet with an attorney for legal counseling, what should I bring, Shanice?
So with the business law corp one, or just generally?
Let's take a step back first. So a lot of small businesses kind of really struggling right now, not really knowing where to go. And I think with any small business, you're wearing so many different hats. How do you know when you need a professional? When do you know that you either need to consult, Shanice or Kelly for help?
That answer to that question is going to depend. So I hate to give that lawyer the lawyer answer, but it depends on your issue. It depends on what's at stake. Like, so some people, I'm having people come to me who are just want to explore their options and are kind of thinking ahead. So right now they're still be able to pay their rent, but they're wanting to do planning. So they want to just explore options. There are other people who are in more dire circumstances. So they're anticipating not even being able to make their next rent payment. In which case, if the consequences are bigger, it might be worth it to invest a little bit of time and money and talk to a professional to get help. So that would be my recommendation. But usually when people meet with me, they don't come with a whole bunch of documents. They just usually meet with me, and then we're talking through issues, and then from there I'll tell them, can you provide this and this document to help kind of streamline the analysis.
How about you, Kelly? When for tenants, when would you recommend they come to you and ask for your assistance?
I think during this time, a lot of the tenants that have been asking me questions about how COVID would impact them is on renewal deals. So I guess it's important for you to talk with the leasing agent at your property and then just kind of see what options there are. There may be other tenants in the property have had other creative solutions that could apply to you as well. Or even for businesses that are currently maybe in a month-to-month space and they need to downsize, they want to look at options like that, that would be a good time to reach out to me. I could kind of think of other places they could go or other options they could do.
Yeah, so I would echo that. So whenever you're up against an option to extend maybe coming up, or your lease term is expiring soon, and then you're looking to what is your plan. Now, a lot of people tend to just wait to the last minute and put it off and then deal with it when it gets really close. The best way to do it, I think, is to give yourself enough time to do your homework, to consult with people, because there's a whole strategy, especially with COVID, like when should you exercise your option to extend? Maybe you don't need to exercise it yet, so you should wait a little while to see how the market plays out. There's a lot of strategy that goes into that. So I would recommend getting ahead of it as much as you can.
So what I'm hearing a lot of is be really organized, have all your documents ready, and be proactive, right? Always keep those lines of communication open with your tenant or with your landlord, whichever side you're on. I'm not sure if it's easy to do this, but for everyone who's attending, is there a way that you can indicate whether what phase you're at, whether you're either looking to lease a space or whether you already have a lease space? Then maybe we can address some of the questions that are more particular to you guys. Cool. Brittany said we could do a poll.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious to know where a lot of the attendees are at, whether they're thinking about getting a space, whether they're thinking about getting out of their space because of COVID. But in the meantime, Shanice, I think this question goes to you. Other states and I think you mentioned that in other states and cities, there are more tenant protections than what we have here in Hawaii. Do you have any examples of, what those protections might look like, and any thoughts on how we might be able to get them here in Hawaii?
Yeah. So I think most of what I've been seeing is in the space of the government orders. So included in that, a lot of the states or counties were started off like ours, where it's just residential, and then a lot of them then extended it to commercial, because I think they realized that the commercial, the business industry is being impacted as well. So some of the types of relief that were provided in those orders were things like rent deferment. So for a certain period of time, like say 6 months, with outside date when the tenants have to repay it by. Mandatory waiving, the landlords have to waive, they can't charge any late fees or interest. A lot of them apply to particularly to small businesses and nonprofits too. So I think they could tell that that small businesses were hurting particularly. And then I've seen some where it required the landlords and tenants to negotiate in good faith. In one case, I think I even saw, I can't remember if it was a California jurisdiction, that the parties have to negotiate in good faith. And if after say 30 days, they weren't able to resolve it, then the tenant would have a termination right, which that's kind of interesting. Yeah, so there was lots of other things. So you could just simply do a Google search and find out a lot of what the other states have been doing as well. But I think it's interesting to see if Hawaii will follow suit and if there would be any objections and fighting on that as well.
Shanice, that's my question actually, and I don't think it was understood correctly because.
Okay.
Sorry, I mean, I know what you mean. I have Googled it, and I do have some information about California, New York, and Washington. I meant more on the state and city level existing laws, because prior to COVID, I mean, there's some states that are more tenant friendly than others, and our state is one of like the least tenant friendly states in terms of like what we allow commercial landlords to do just in general. So just for everyone who is unfamiliar with this, I'm from Hawaii, but I used to live in New York City for a very long time. I lived in New York for almost like 10 years. So I do have some experience in another state. And what I've seen is that New York has more laws in place for tenant protections prior to COVID. So after COVID hit, you see more landlords who are used to and willing to work with their tenants before it's like, mandated with a COVID legislation. So my question is more, do you have links or like examples of what we can recommend to our legislators to pass in terms of laws that are more tenant friendly? Because maybe it's been that, I work with KBPA, the Kaimki Business Professional Association, and when we talk to our city council members, sometimes they just really have no idea because they have no comparison. So, you being in law and knowing like what to look for, what could I suggest to our members so that they kind of know what to look for?
Yeah, definitely. So that's absolutely correct in that Hawaii does not have a comprehensive body of law that's comparable to like the landlord tenant code in the residential space, right? So for commercial leases, it's kind of just, that's why it's so important that whatever is in your lease agreement, you make sure you understand that. That being said, other jurisdictions do have some statutory law that governs commercial leases. I think California is one of them that has some statutory law. There are probably others. So I can look and I can, maybe drop me, shoot me an email or something, and then I can, get in touch with you on that. But I do agree that maybe it's something that needs to be addressed with legislation, maybe not a comprehensive thing, but some ways where small business tenants just have no leverage, but it's a consumer protection kind of argument, right? That, hey, this is a basic fairness issue and we should at least be able to get this. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think to kind of tag along to what Shanice is saying, I think Hawaii very much is, especially in the commercial context, a freedom of contract state. So much of what goes into your lease, you really, it changes from lease to lease, from landlord to landlord. For the tenants who are attending, if you had to, most of them don't have a lot of negotiating leverage with the landlords. What would be kind of some of the battles that they would want to pick when they're negotiating their lease? Like if you had to pick kind of some really, really important things that, if you can't fix everything, maybe just kind of zone in on a couple things. Kelly, what would be like one of the top issues that you recommend tenants to look at?
see. I think right now a lot of tenants are trying to get more free rent for new deals, especially. More landlords are kind of a little bit more willing since, you know, some other tenants aren't paying anyway. So that kind of helps you get moved into your space and build it out.
And I think even to know that that's negotiable or that they can ask for it, I think is, you know, when I started practicing, I had no idea, you know, what you could ask for. And so I think that just knowing that you can ask for free rent or ask for concessions is an important takeaway. All right, we are hitting the kind of last 5 minute. Yeah, we're in the last 5 minutes. Any closing remarks from either of our speakers?
No, I just think this whole situation has been very hard for everyone. I do think that from what I'm seeing anyway, that the landlords have been, for the most part, willing to work with tenants to varying degrees. Though, as Kelly mentioned, you know, some people are not willing to give anything, some people are giving a lot, and I'm seeing very generous offers as well. So I would kind of want to note the whole spectrum. But I say it's worth a shot to try to negotiate. So, you know, whenever people are saying like, "Oh, I don't want to ask because I don't want to ruffle any feathers," or "I don't want to," you know, if your business is suffering and you need it, and that's what it's going to take to survive, you know, it's worth a shot to attempt a negotiation and work with your landlord to try to find a solution that will allow you to stay in business.
Yep, I agree with that. I think getting ahead and getting everything prepared early and starting the negotiation early on, and just being really open and asking for things, because maybe you're scared to ask, but you ask and the landlord's like, oh, okay, you know, maybe we could do something with that. We could work something out with that. So I think just being open and honest on wanting to work something out with your landlord is the best.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that concludes our seminar. Thank you so much, Shanice and Kelly, for lending your expertise and sharing with us. Brittany, any closing words from your end?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, Shanice and Kelly. You guys were awesome. And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And also, too, we really wanted to thank Kat from the BLC as well, with her help with helping us with putting this webinar series together. So for all of those that are attending, I'm not sure if you have seen, but we actually have several other webinars that are set up for the month of July. And the purpose for that, and the reason why we started this, is because here at our center, at the Mink Center for Business and Leadership, we provide business and legal counseling. And for the legal counseling, we are very lucky to have the Business Law Corps assisting us with that. And we know that definitely getting any type of legal assistance for a small business can be very daunting. However, you know, the Business Law Corps is such a great resource to get things started. So if you are interested in signing up for that, please email us. You can actually email Maylin at mzambrano@ywc@wahoo.org. She had actually entered in her email earlier on. But coming up, we actually have 2 other webinars that we are going to be focusing on. So next Tuesday on July 14th, we are going to have the impact of COVID-19 on small business employees. And then following that, on July 21st, we have our webinar that's focused on online small businesses, because we know that there are a lot of questions for especially the small businesses that just started to get into the online small business arena. We know that there, you know, are a lot of legal issues that they're probably trying to, you know, figure out, like, well, what can I do? What can I do? And then also to, you know, are there anything specifically, you know, from a legal standpoint, both for online small business or for employees, what kind of questions I need to be asking. So please be sure to check out our website. We're actually going to be posting the links today so that you can register for that. But if you have any additional questions, please let us know. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We will be sending a link to today's program to all of you, as well as a copy of the handouts. But thank you so much. Bye. Bye.